Hi.
Hi,
Uh, what's your name?
my name is Inge Johnson.
And how old are you?
I'm 86. I'll be 87 in September.
Um, you lived through World War II.
Yes, I'm one of the lucky ones. We left Germany in December 1938.
When exactly did you learn of the full events of the Holocaust?
Unfortunately, we had that, we knew what was happening. Unfortunately, I lost part of my family. When I first was born, we lived in a small town near Berlin, and we lived in the same house as my father's parents. And I remember grandmother and grandfather, but then in 1936, there came a lot of difficulties. Among them was that they took my grandparents' business away, and they said Jewish children don't go to public school anymore. I had finished first grade in that small town. So my father, mother, and my sisters and I moved to Berlin, and my grandparents moved to another city called Karlsruhe. Unfortunately, I never saw the grandparents again because in 1940 they were sent by train to a camp in France. A lot of people don't know that France also had camps. They were in Camp Gurs, and that's where my grandparents perished. My other grandmother had a little bit more mazel. On September 3rd, 1939, she was planning to fly from Berlin to London, and she had a ticket on September 3rd. But September 1, 1939, the Nazis invaded Poland, the war started, so she never got to England. But through some good luck somewhere, she managed to get to Spain. From Spain, she got to Cuba, and from Cuba, she got to California. So she lived with us the rest of her life, so I grew up with one grandmother.
Wow.
So since my family, we knew what was happening, I was not shielded. I knew things were going on.
How did you deal with the knowledge? Because I know at first not many people really knew what was going on.
Well, like I said, we knew, and sometimes I know one thing, that I often had nightmares, and then I would walk in my sleep and people would remember, hey, it's okay, it's okay. But I did have nightmares. And occasionally I do, as an adult also, I have nightmares. Because it had happened that sometimes I would sleep at somebody's house, and then I would scream in the middle of the night. And people would say, what's going on? Nothing's hurting you, but something did psychologically affect me.
When was the first time you noticed something was wrong?
Probably when grandmother could no longer take us to the beach. Grandmother would take us to the beach until the time came where it said Jews are not allowed to go to the beach. And I was all right in the first grade. People were friendly to me, whereas my older sister was feeling discriminated by the teachers. So my sister and I were the only Jewish children in the school, the same school that my father had attended when he was a little boy. So that was just about the beginning. Later on, when we were in Berlin, we couldn't go to the zoo. In the zoo, they had a big sign, Jews and dogs keep out.
And I'm to understand you lived through Kristallnacht.
That's right. We were living in Berlin on Kristallnacht, but 4 things happened in our family. 2 good things and 2 bad things. The first good thing was the letter arrived from the United States. We had an uncle who was living in the United States, and he sent us permission that we could come to America. And that day, my parents bought ship tickets for our family. My little sister was 5, I was 9, my big sister was 12, and my parents, and we bought ship tickets so that we could go to New York and then take another ship to go to California. That was the first good thing. Mm-hmm. Then we had another good piece of fortune. My father had friends, and one of them realized something bad was happening that evening. Mm-hmm. So he said to my father, Eric, do not be at home tonight. So my father spent the night riding the subway trains. He was underground all night, The next day things were a little bit calmer, and so my father was one of the few Jewish men who was not arrested that night.
Wow.
But two bad things happened. From the balcony, my sisters and I and my mother, we could see the flames from the synagogue, the one that has been restored later, but we could see that. But to me, something else happened. See, not only did they burn down the synagogues that night and they smashed the stores, that's why it's called Kristallnacht, because it's the night of the broken glass, but they burnt my school down. You see, when we moved to Berlin, my sister and I went to a Jewish school, and when I went back to Berlin many years later, in 2000, then I saw the place where the school used to be. It's now a vacant lot with a big sign, former home of the Lenore Goldsmith School. But I couldn't go to school anymore. Fortunately, 6 weeks later, we were on a ship. Before the Holocaust, we had somebody who was like a nanny to me, and her name was Anna. And when we left, she gave me a beautiful doll. When the eyes open and close, and I took that doll with me. When we were aboard the ship, they do things like, here the kids can be in the nursery and the adults play bridge, and this one goes on the swimming pool, etc. So there was a children's nursery, and I had my doll with me when one of the boys grabbed the doll away from me and punched the eyes in and said, "I'm playing Hitler." So the doll was blind. But I loved that doll anyway, and that was given to me by Anna, our nanny. So that's one of my memories that was not so pleasant.
So where did you go after that?
Well, where did we go after we got on the ship? What we were planning to do, you see, at that time, we could take very little American money with us. We were allowed $25 for the family. Then the rest of the German money they had to keep there. We couldn't buy new jewelry, it's sort of a frozen account. But we were allowed to use German money to pay for the ships. So what my father had planned is we take a ship to New York, and then instead of getting on the other ship to go by the Panama Canal to California, we would sell those tickets, have a little extra money, and take a Greyhound bus to go to Salt Lake City. But what we did not count on was the storms in the Atlantic. You've seen all the bad weather we have had lately. Well, we were 5 hours between ships. So that didn't give us time enough to sell the tickets. So we got on the other ship, and 5 hours later we sailed to the Panama Canal, and that's where we were New Year's 38, 39. And then we landed in California. We landed in Los Angeles.
How long did you live here then?
In Los Angeles, just a few months. We were greeted by a group of very nice people who said, "Hey, look, here come some people who need extra help." And one of the people that my father met was a businessman who had a feed and grain business. My father and grandfather had a feed and grain business in Germany. And so this very nice fellow said, "Eric, I'm going to drive around California. You can come with me." And when they came to Tulare, a small town, nobody's ever heard of it. But when they got there, Mr. Gillespie said to my father, "Eric, I don't have an outlet for my feeds here. I'll help you get started in business." And that's how a family from Germany landed in Tulare, California. Very few Jews there. There were about 4 Jewish families in Tulare, and a few families in a nearby city and another nearby city. So if we wanted to go for the holidays, for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, we would drive to Fresno, which was 45 miles away. Well, it was closer than going to Bakersfield, which was 63 miles away. So I grew up with a very Reformed family. We didn't go to temple very often, but we went for the high holidays. We kept the Passover, we kept Hanukkah. So we kept some holidays, but I didn't go to temple very often. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I was 9 years old when we came to California. I didn't know any English, And I remember going to school with my English-German dictionary. And if the kids stood up to go outside, I followed them, we could play. And the whole thing was very strange to me. But at age 9, it didn't take that long to learn a new language. And I think by the time I was here 6 months, I could speak fluent English.
Wow.
I don't have an accent because I was 9. People who were at their teens or later, they never lose their accent. So I felt very comfortable coming to America. My parents got their first papers so they could become American citizens. And 5 years later, they had gone to night school, learned about the Constitution. At the same time, I happened to be in the 8th grade, we were learning about the Constitution. So my Americans became citizens, and since I was still under 18, I became an American citizen thanks to my parents. And then when I finished high school, I moved to San Francisco. I lived in a Jewish home and went to college, got married, had 3 little children, lived in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, 40 years. And then I retired and I moved to someplace very special, Israel. Why Israel? First of all, both of my sisters had already moved to Israel in 1968 and in 1971, and they took their children with them. Their children were 8 or 9 years of age. Like I said, at age 9, you can learn a new language. Now, I have often visited Israel. My sisters are not with us anymore, but their children and grandchildren are, so that when I travel, I do something that not very many people get the opportunity to do. I get to stay for a month at a time. Not very many people can afford to be away for a month, so it makes me feel good that I often get the chance to go to Israel. And I lived there 15 years. I lived in Netanya, and I made a lot of friends, and so it's nice that I have family and friends, so Israel is home to me.
So what do you remember about each age, like your 20s, your 30s?
In my 20s, I got married at 21. I met my future husband when we were both in college. We were at Hillel when I was a freshman, and so for 4 years we were friendly but not that close. But in my senior year, we got very close. And a week after I graduated, on June 17th, 1951, we got married. I was 21, he was 22. And then we lived in the Bay Area, and I started teaching, and that was fine until I got pregnant. So my older daughter was born in 1952, and then I had another little girl. She was born in 54. And then I had a little boy who was born in 57. So my 3 children were very close to each other. They were 2 years and 3 years apart. Unlike my grandchildren, my daughter had a daughter, and 11 years later she had a son. My son had a son, and 10 years later he had a daughter. So how much apart are you two?
2 to 3 years. Or like
Yeah, when you're 2 or 3 years apart, you can really be friends. But when you're 10 years apart, it's a little bit more difficult.
It's a little hard.
Yeah.
So that was when I'm in my 20s and 30s, so between teaching school and being a mom. And my husband and I eventually got to the point where we misunderstood each other enough to say it's time for a divorce. But he asked me to do something, not like my sister. My younger sister got a divorce from her guy, and she wanted her children to grow up in Israel. So she moved to Israel, and of course that made it difficult. So when my husband and I divorced, he made plans. He gave me money so that I would have the house and some money, and I gave him control of his business, and he asked me only, will I stay in the Bay Area so he could still be involved with the children? And because if you're 10,000 miles away, you can't be very close.
What about your 40s and 50s?
Okay, that's when I was a single parent, and did have some problems, but I did teach school a lot. And then something nice happened. I retired. I retired in 1988, and I was still in my early 60s, so I retired early, and I decided to move to Israel. And that really made it very nice because I loved living in Israel. I didn't want to live with my sisters. One of my sisters was living in Ashkelon, and both of them were living in Ashkelon at first. And I moved to Netanya, found a lot of interesting things to do, including teaching bridge and teaching English and being a volunteer in the schools and helping with teaching English. So I kept a busy life there. But after 15 years, I'll tell you what really scared me about Israel. Yes, I was living there at the time when we were having the missiles from Iraq, and everybody got gas mask kits, and we had to go in our safe rooms. Also, unfortunately, there were a lot of people who thought, hey, it would be kind of fun to have a bomb at the shopping center or have a bomb blow up the farmer's market or various other things. Well, that was scary, but what also was scary in Israel was car accidents. And actually, more people had been killed by car accidents than killed by bombs. Now, what's scary in America? There are car accidents. Are you worried every time you get in a car? I don't know whether we'll be safe today. Shall we drive? But you know that car accidents happen. So that was okay. But I'll tell you what really bothered me. I met a lot of seniors who were living in an assisted living place complaining, I'm so lonesome. My only daughter lives in Australia, or my only son lives in England. They never come and see me. My children and grandchildren were all living either in California or Nevada. And I said, before I become a bitter, lonely old lady, I'm coming back to California.
No.
That was the smartest thing to do. I was 72 years old at that time. So then I tried to find a place to live in the Bay Area where I'd lived for 40 years, had a lot of friends, and I had a daughter and grandchildren there. And I started having friends here. I went to Temple, Israel, which was just 3 blocks away from where I lived. I met a lot of nice people. So now I'm going to tell you about what do I do to keep busy. Because I live with those other seniors, I have friends. It's so nice. We meet in the lobby, or sometimes we have a potluck luncheon or something like that. And the nicest thing is this particular building is right next door to the Jewish Community Center. So guess where I spend a lot of my time? I love being at the Jewish Center. There are physical activities. I can go swimming. I can do all kinds of things. And on Mondays, we have a group of friends who knit and crochet and tell jokes, so we're the Knitwits. That's where I meet your grandma. And on Wednesdays, we have a senior luncheon and activities, and I teach people how to play bridge. And then just to keep me busier, I'm a fire ambassador. We don't put out fires, but we go to all the schools in Long Beach, Signal Hill, and Lakewood, go to the 3rd grades, and we teach fire safety. So, and then we give a lot of things because sometimes we say something that a kid brings home and it turns out to save somebody's life. And I will tell you, the one thing that everybody should know, and including your family, I'll bet you haven't done it, you should have a family meeting place. Unfortunately, sometimes mom and dad go out the front door, Susie goes out the patio door, and then the fire department comes and says, is everybody there? I don't know. Maybe I've got to go back in the burning house and rescue Susie. So what we do is think of a place where you could meet. Maybe, hey, across the street, see that garage door that has a green door? Let's meet there. Or over there, they have a basketball hoop in their driveway. Let's meet there. So everybody for homework, get a family meeting place and have a fire drill, and that's where we will meet if there is something. And we also teach them about calling 911. And so we ask them, what is important about calling 911? So they'll say, 911 operator, and they'll say, what is your emergency? My kitchen's on fire. What's your name? Susie Smith. Where do you? What's your address? Then I ask, are you home now? And they say yes. And then I say, get out of there. Don't ever call 911 when your house is on fire. Get across the street, yell for help, and say, neighbors, will you call 911? Don't stay in that burning building.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of things that we explain to the kids.
Yeah, I'll just open
See,
this.
Molly, I told your brother I'm 86, and a lot of people say, hey, how come you're so busy doing so many things? And I'll tell you my secret. My secret is that I am a positive person. Instead of saying, oh, poor me, look at this awful thing that happened. Oh, I'm so sad this happened to me. Oh. I don't have that attitude. Yes, I've had quite a few bad things happen. When I was a child, I was living in Germany, and things were not very good. I could tell you a lot more of things that were not good then. But you see, I don't emphasize that. I emphasize the positive. And I'll tell you the worst thing that can happen to people, and I've had that twice. I told you I had 3 children. I have 1. I lost my son 17 years ago, and I lost my daughter 4 years ago. My son was very ill and took more pain pills than he should have. And my daughter had ALS, the Lou Gehrig disease, and I watched her go downhill, where her mind stayed good, but her body kept falling apart. But as much as I miss those 2 children of mine, I'm so grateful they each had a boy and a girl, and each of my granddaughters are mothers of my great-grandsons.
Do you have any special sayings or expressions?
And I learned this from my 6th grade teacher, and I wish a certain person who's running for president would have learned this. It says, let us learn to disagree without being disagreeable. No, that's really because, look, I teach bridge, and on Wednesday afternoons I have a group who come to the J, but there have been some people who have been arguing with each other. So I have found a way to solve it so that they don't argue, because like I said, learn to disagree without being disagreeable. And that's what I try to do, try to calm it down and say, hey, we can change something to do it this way or that way. So that's important to me.
How do you define a good life or a successful life?
A successful life is when you do see what you have and make the most of it. I wake up in the morning and say, oh, I'm glad I'm awake. And now I can take my shower, get dressed, eat my breakfast, and feel grateful that so many people in the world don't have water. So many people in the world don't have food. And I'm just thankful that I'm awake and that I have these things, that I have a daughter who lives only 3 miles away. She lives just 2 blocks away from here. So I'm grateful that we have a good relationship. There are so many families that just don't know how to get along with each other. You know, that there's so much tension and bitterness, and or they're far away and they don't want to be with each other. So I feel very fortunate that I do have a lot of good things in my life, rather than saying, oh, poor me, look at all the horrible things that happened, I'm so lonely. And I'm not. I have friends and I have family and I have my health. So what more could I ask for?
Did you have any heroes or role models when you were a kid?
Heroes and role models. I know I loved going to the movies and admired Frank Sinatra. Oh, I loved Frank Sinatra. And I still, anything, if I see an old movie on TCM with Frank Sinatra, I record it and watch it later. So, I mean, I really thought that he was just absolutely the greatest. And of course, there were a lot of others like Bob Hope and so on. But Frank Sinatra, I really loved his singing.